Hello, good morning. Welcome to our fourth episode of MASpresso. As usual, I'm joined by Jake. How are you doing?
Good, good.
You're good?
Hope you're doing well as well.
I'm good now that we're doing our fourth episode of MASpresso. So today we'll be discussing a very infamous holiday we have, which is May Day, the 1st of May, with that coming up. So the 1st of May, as we know locally, is a very partisan affair, as are most public holidays, such as Freedom Day, Independence, etc.
Malta in particular.
Malta very much takes a partisan role in these feasts. But we would like to start, first of all, with how this commemoration came to be. So we'll go into a bit of a historical analysis and I'll leave that to Jake. And then we'll take a look at how the church transformed this holiday into a commemoration dignifying the rights of workers. And we'll talk a little bit about St. Joseph and his influence on the feast as well. So I'll leave the floor to Jake to start off a bit.
So, May Day, as it's known today, or International Workers' Day, began initially in the United States in the late 19th century. So it began in Chicago, the year 1886, where there were the so-called Haymarket riots. What these riots were about were essentially workers protesting in order to gain what we take for granted today, the 8-hour workday. Obviously, in the late 19th century,
It was a different context.
the West was undergoing the Industrial Revolution. Society was transforming from an agrarian one into a more industrious one. You had a lot of people who used to work in farms and
Moving
were
to the
peasants,
cities.
moving into cities in droves in order to find jobs there. And obviously the conditions of these jobs in these new factories, where there were the first mass producing organizations, companies, were abysmal. You had very long shifts. Conditions were terrible.
You had children working, you had
You had
women
children
working.
exactly. Pay was bad
Miserable
as well. And also you had a lot of workers who, because they moved into cities to work in these factories, they had to live in the cities as well. And the other problem that there were that rents were too high for workers to afford as well. So you had all of these things combined: low wages, terrible conditions, high working hours. It makes you think a bit that from the 19th century to today, Malta specifically, we're not that much far off,
Seems we're kind of
We
stuck
have-
in the same loop.
We have unaffordable rents in Malta, for example, and
Very poor
and,
conditions.
a lot of people working extra hours in order to make up for their pay. So it's in terms of the commemoration, or at least the recognition of the dignity of workers, it's still a day which we ought to give certain importance. Obviously, it depends on what ideological interpretation you give it. Basically, what happened during the strike, the protest, it was led mainly by an anarchist named Albert Parsons. And obviously the intentions were not solely to gain more rights for the workers, but obviously there was a lot of left-wing agitation involved.
An anarchist after all.
An anarchist, exactly. And what happened basically was that the protest got a bit out of hand, and a fight ended up ensuing with the local police. And I think some 4 people got killed during, many injured, and 4 people got killed, workers, from the riot. Obviously, socialist movements within the United States took notice of this and used it as a scapegoat to sort of pit themselves
Against the system.
the workers against the system. Even chants such as to arms, and the capitalists let loose their dogs on us, meaning the police force
And
itself.
it's very important to keep in mind that whenever we talk about riots on the left, it always tends to take, a violent rhetoric and a violent direction. I mean, the Industrial Revolution obviously has its seeds from the French Revolution as well, and we see that taking place. So it's very important kind of to be able to recognize that this is a pattern that you see when it comes to, socialist cause for justice, for example.
Yes, and certain rhetorics against the establishment and the police, it's a rhetoric that we still see today, like defund the police and all that.
Exactly.
It's always an anti, so to say, elitist movement.
Rather than elitist, I think it's authoritarian because in reality,
It ends up
against
becoming.
authorities is what I mean.
It's yes, it's against all authority. At least that's what they say. But at the end of the day, and as we see in history, when these people come to power, they end up becoming a worse authority than the one
Exactly, because
preceding
ironically, the elites are sometimes, the most leftist of them all.
Yes,
So-
yes. Basically, what happened after the 1886 riots was that there began to be commemorations of this event, which happened on the 1st of May. And by 1891, 1891 is also the year where the encyclical Rerum Novarum came out by Pope Leo XIII. In 1891, it was established by the Second Socialist International in a congress they had in Paris, that from that date forwards, May 1st would become a sort of an international Workers' Day movement or dedication to the workers. It was a day intended to supersede borders as well. So it was a call for all workers of the world to commemorate the 1st of May.
It's very, I mean, it's a reminder
internationalist.
of Karl Marx's work, workers of the world unite.
Exactly,
it's
exactly.
that sentiment.
Yes, yes. And basically from that day onwards, all May 1st started to become dedicated to the cause of the workers' movement. Obviously, and especially during those times, the 1st of May became highly associated with left-wing socialist and later communist movements. And 1st of May had also become a day renowned for bloodshed as well.
Exactly.
Because it was always used as an excuse
For violence.
for riots, etc. Now, one can say that the workers themselves did not live in good conditions, and they had every right, I think, to protest their conditions
And want to have a
and
fairer
to have
treatment.
a more dignified treatment.
Exactly.
The problem was that this movement of the workers was, so to say, the socialists, the left-wingers, jumped on the bandwagon of the
To misuse it
of
for
the
something
of,
completely
of, of the
different.
cause. Yes, exactly, and gave it their own ideological imprint, so to say, whereby the only way that workers can better their working conditions and their living conditions was through
Seizing
Marxian ideas of class warfare,
seizing the means of production.
seizing the means of production, etc.
Violence, bloodshed.
Exactly, and in fact, many left-wing states, the first communist state in the world was official communist state was the Soviet Union, for example, used to commemorate the 1st of May as sort of
A holy day,
a holy day, so to say. And that's also another thing that one should take note of, that the 1st of May was intended, and Stalin, when he was still young, in the late 19th century, he was still a young revolutionary, a bandit, a thief, because that's what he was in fact, till his death. Um, uh, he used to say in his speeches which we used to give in St. Petersburg in the Russian Empire that time at that period, that it's not good or it's not just that the bourgeois class have their own feasts, which they use to exploit workers,
Of course.
and it's not just that priests have their feast days, which they use to brainwash the workers. So let the 1st of May be
Our feast.
our feast of the workers, where
But
we unite against our
that's
oppressors.
exactly what socialism seeks to do. It seeks to remove God and make states, the God, so the government that they're running with. And you can't, negate the fact that socialism doesn't seek to build the worker up, but it seeks to tear those, that have more of a ranking, let's say, down. So it's not about building up, it's always about tearing down. It's
Yes,
the
yes.
classic.
And it's the left wing way,
Exactly.
the left wing. The left were founded on tearing down institutions, not
Exactly.
building them. And whenever they rebuilt institutions, more often than not, they were
Propaganda machines.
imitations of the old institutions. So in this case, for example, the 1st of May, it was used sort of to imitate, became the holy day of the workers, and a mockery of religious holidays,
And
be it Catholic or
Of course,
Orthodox,
of course.
with regards to
The
Russia,
East, exactly.
etc.
And I think that's where the church came in so strongly because, looking back at the history of the church, it's always been a defender of workers. And during this period, I think the church really put its mark on the world as a defender of not only rights and the dignity of the worker, but the worker itself. And in front of me, I have 3 very important encyclicals. So one was by Blessed Pope Pius IX, which he wrote on faith and religion, and he warned about the imminent dangers of communism. The papacy has often referred to it as a dark design, and it tries to, like we were saying, essentially that it tries to make use of workers, but in a way to misuse them. So instead of actually being there to defend them, it's there to use them just as a plot to gain what the few want. So it's still about the elite using the workers. Unfortunately, it's always going to be like that. We also then had in 1878 by the same Pope Leo XIII, who wrote Rerum Novarum, who spoke about the plague of socialism. And I think that having a church that came out so strongly at the time to defend workers and clearly made its position certain really influenced then modern rights for workers. I think it was not only instrumental, but it was probably one of the foundational stones that then led to May Day taking on a different shape.
Yes, in fact, the church has been defending workers at least since the Middle Ages, when it comes to the institution of the church, at least. With regards to biblical teachings and the teachings of Christ, there's already a
Catholic
strong,
social teaching,
there's
etc.
already a strong base to build on there, with regards to the dignity of every person. But it's also good to note that, for example, medieval society. In medieval society, you had
Feudalism.
but you also had the guilds, the famous guilds,
Of course,
guild
of course.
associations,
Of course.
which were essentially sort of cooperatives in the modern sense, which used to essentially look after each other, give alms, and also
There's a form of corporatism.
it's
I
a
believe.
sort of a cooperative effect
Exactly.
between those who employ, at least in the medieval sense, and those who were doing the work.
work.
For example, the blacksmiths would have their own guilds,
Exactly.
carpenters,
I believe.
carpenters, etc. And it's not so different from the later 19th century encyclicals and also 20th century encyclicals, which used to talk about cooperation between all classes of society, and also the creation of the corporate state. The corporate state in the sense, not in the later sort of fascistic sense, which was still state dominant,
Exactly.
but more so
Building people up.
what Pius the
12th,
11th
11th.
called for, a state, a society, a nation whereby corporations and workers, um, uh, corporations would help workers and employers work with each other for the greater good of society, whereby the top priority was not the material goods, as is the case with socialism,
And the
but
modern
also
sense, of course,
but also with
capitalism,
capitalism as well, which both see the human person as sort
a
of
means to an
a
end.
means to an end, as a monetary object, but rather in the sense that the idea that work, and this is something that also Pope John Paul II mentions,
Definitely.
that work cannot do without labor, labor cannot do without work, for example. Um, uh, and that the road for every worker and employer is to sort of move closer to sainthood,
Exactly.
sanctifying not only their individual selves, but also the sanctification of society.
One of, I think, because you mentioned Pope Pius the 11th, I think Pope Pius the 12th is one of probably my favorite popes, even though you shouldn't have favorites. And I found this quote recently when he was talking about, of course, May Day. And it reads as follows: "It is not rare the case in which the Catholic worker, for lack of a solid religious formation, finds himself disarmed." Look at the language he uses. "When similar theories are proposed to him, he is unable to answer, and sometimes he even lets himself be contaminated by the poison of error." And I think it's so interesting to use this language because that's exactly what was happening, and we see it now as well, be it if it's socialism or and communism or else rampant capitalism. So one segment kind of dominates the language, the rhetoric, the universities, rather the means of production, it's the means of education and the means of access to education to push this agenda. And that's exactly what Pope Pius XII is saying there, and it's what he lived during those times. It's this idea that if we push, for example, May Day to be a commemoration of something, then that's it's historical revisionism. And I think we're seeing that now as well. I mean, we may have veered a bit from the West, at least, standpoint, from socialism towards rampant capitalism, but that's still very bad. And we see it locally. I mean, when we talk about the third country nationals that are coming in to work for us Maltese at miserable conditions, I mean, passports being taken, no sick days being given. That is exactly what it is. It is the exploitation of the worker. Even though it's not, socialism, it's rampant capitalism, which the church still very much disagrees with. I mean, Rerum Novarum is giving you that third way in which you're meant to operate as a nation state.
Yes, and in fact, there's this not postcard. What would you call it? Sort of a manifest, a political manifestation, a political manifest or posters.
A brochure.
They used which in Italy, which in post-war Italy they used to stick on walls and all that during election times, etc. And the imagery on it is a worker, and on him there's written Il lavoratore cristiano,
Yes, I know
the
the one.
Christian worker. Now, underneath him there are two dragons,
Dragons.
a green dragon and a red dragon, capitalismo, socialismo,
socialismo.
so capitalism and socialism. And the symbolism behind it is very powerful because it represents the Catholic social teaching,
The position.
the official position of the church, which was highly more emphasized during that time, I think, where there is a rejection of dogmatic capitalism and dogmatic socialism.
The predisposed system, that you find
Exactly.
yourself in.
So it's sort of the idea that a worker, before he's a worker, he's a human person. And the idea is not to subjugate workers to political ideologies for the benefit of those ideologies, but rather to see the worker as a human person in his entirety, or her entirety, as a social being endowed by certain rights
The likeness of God as well.
by the Creator, by God Himself, and which respects the dignity as any other person, rich or poor, worker or not, um, uh, needs. And this is something that the Catholic Church has always been consistent in its teachings. So, for example, you get these, for instance, certain American commentators, which, when they start reading about the teachings of the church on capitalism, socialism, the workers, they start saying, oh, well, Catholic social teaching, oh, it's just a lot of socialist nonsense, you know. I mean,
But that's
you can't really say that
no,
the
that
church is socialist.
exactly. That's when you look at it from a surface level, and you're so caught up in your, when capitalism becomes the god of your country.
And in fact, sometimes even certain Americans, mostly not Catholics, but there are some Catholics who might think that, but mostly Protestants, for example, who would say, Jesus invented capitalism. He would have been a capitalist. It's not correct to subjugate
Of course not.
Christ and his church to two ideologies, which essentially they were born in the 19th century.
It's as wrong as
In
people
their
who
modern
say
sense, at
Jesus
least.
was the first socialist,
Exactly, and that's
Definitely
something
not.
else. I mean, it's something which locally we had certain politicians, at least in the 1970s, for example.
Misquoting on purpose,
Who used to say-
Salvatore and Nazareno.
Exactly. He was the first socialist. We're doing what
God intended us to do.
we're continuing the work of even the last leader of the Soviet Union, Gorbachev, when he was asked about Christ, he said, I show a lot of respect to Christ because he was the first socialist, for example. And
Misusing
And
it
even-
for political crusades.
there are even certain currents within the church itself
Yes.
which espouse these beliefs.
Yes.
So for example, liberation theologians and all that.
Which did a lot of damage to the actual,
Yes, exactly.
strengthening of the church and its position in the world.
Because Catholic social teaching with regards to the worker and the employer and society and all that is something that's built on the teachings of the church fathers, like St. Augustine, St. Thomas of Aquinas, etc.
Pope Benedict XVI,
Saint
which we hope
Ambrose.
to see become, a doctor
Pope
as
Benedict continued building on Catholic teaching. There's also the good the one of the great encyclicals of the last century, Mater et Magistra,
well. Of course.
which was very influential on Catholic political parties in Europe at the time.
And it's very interesting to see that it was even published locally in Maltese
Yes.
during the time period when it came out.
In the
which is
1960s.
Very, very,
Yes,
very
yes, yes.
interesting.
And basically, it's not the church's position cannot be dictated by their one ideology or the other when it comes to how society should be
The
run.
church is external to the
The church-
sphere of bipolarity when it
The
comes to
church
politics.
is outside of society,
Exactly.
but it should influence society.
Exactly.
So it supersedes all of this stuff. It's above politics, so to say.
Yes.
It transcends it. So to try and subjugate the church to either capitalist ideology or socialist ideology, it would be very wrong, I think.
And building upon this, because obviously we know the local context being what it is, but the church, I think, did something very brilliant by invoking the image of Saint Joseph. So Saint Joseph, we all know him as, the chaste husband of Mary. We know him as the mortal father figure who filled in that gap within our religion, but we know him as Joseph the carpenter as well. And I think the church so aptly made use of Saint Joseph to invoke this idea that I'd leave you to develop, that it became something very sentimental. And even for us Maltese, I mean, Saint Joseph is so important locally. He has different, parishes, different churches. And I think it's a sentiment that we kind of sometimes forget as well locally, that we can continue building on. But I'll leave it to you to develop a bit how St. Joseph, took his place in May Day and how it became St. Joseph the Workers' Day.
Yes, so in the 19th century, St. Joseph was proclaimed as the universal the patron of the Universal Church.
Mm-hmm.
But in 1955, Pius XII officially made him also the patron saint of workers. Um, and institutionalized into the general Roman calendar the feast of St. Joseph the Worker on May 1st.
Exactly.
And the point of it all was to sanctify a day which had been taken over by a godless ideology. Um, uh, and I think that from the church's point perspective, it was a very positive move from the church. And also positive in the sense that it chose the carpenter of Nazareth to sort of be the figure to go to for workers, for Catholic workers around the world.
And I think given the context of the time, for example, Pope John Paul II, you know, he saw communism and the dangers of it firsthand. And, you know, he's known as the Pope who kind of held back communism from Europe. And he himself, as you were saying, declared St. Joseph also as the guardian of the Redeemer and the protector of the child Jesus. And I think that's so beautiful because there was a really big so when we talk about May Day from the socialist and communist sense, the focus is purely work. It is the person as the
It's
worker.
materialist.
Exactly. But what Pope John II cleverly does is he links it back to the family. And I think that's so beautiful. You know, you have the twofold aspect of St. Joseph the carpenter, but also St. Joseph, you know, the father. And even though he was focused on raising, you know, his you know, Mary's son here on this earth, you know, his eyes were also fixated on, you know, the divine vocation. And it's a very beautiful link to turn the holiday from just a worker's day, you know, back to bringing it to the work and the family. That's, you know, such an important link that cannot be forgotten within, you know, working. And we see it locally. So, for example, when we have parents' rights to, you know, raising children and still working, the mother who has to now still work and has to work, I mean, essentially she has no choice and still, you know, has to raise a child. I think it's a really beautiful sentiment to circle back.
Yes, and I think when Pius XII made May 1st the day of St. Joseph the Worker, it was also, in terms of the figure of St. Joseph himself, it also, I think, he also wanted to use St. Joseph as an example, as a model for workers. So what do you have in the previous May 1st ideas and demonstrations? You have the idea of strife, violence, seizing
Struggle.
means of production, struggle, class warfare, hatred of other classes.
Discord between society.
Yeah, exactly. You have a lot of destruction. You rarely have the construction of good things. Good things have come out of
Without a doubt.
the organizations which try to protect workers. However, the end does not justify the means.
Never.
As the end of most of these socialist movements was the takeover of society and the dismantling even of the church itself. So what the Pope does is he takes Saint Joseph, a person who says nothing in the Bible, is just there doing his duties, in raising the infant Christ, protecting Mary, and we know that he was a carpenter from Nazareth. So he was a son of David, but he was also a worker. He was a common folk.
And the focus seems to be on, you know, that he was a worker. Of course, he comes from a lineage, but his devotion is to, you know, Christ and his work.
And he is a person of action, so to say.
Yes.
He's a person who does not complain much, complains nothing at all, and at least as what is written in Scripture.
And in his faithfulness, he just follows.
He is a person of duty, of responsibility. And that is something which the Church emphasizes in its teachings with regards to workers. It's a balance between rights but also responsibilities. So a worker has rights to a dignified working condition, to a dignified life by those who hire him,
Who employ
who
him.
employ. But at the same time, the worker has duties himself
And
and
responsibilities.
responsibility to work in an honest manner,
And not just to the work, to the employer himself, but to his family
and
too.
to his family, of course, but also to himself, because this is something, even unfortunately, it's something that's common in today's financialized economies. You get money out of thin air, for example, with no work involved. Technically speaking, it's
Immoral.
it's immoral to get money without work because there's no work involved, you know.
But unfortunately, we built a system where this is the case.
And it's an exploitative system, unfortunately, because then those who work don't get
Exactly.
the decent pay which they need to live a decent life. But this is what Saint Joseph teaches mostly: the idea that work is sanctified. It's not solely materialist.
Exactly.
It's not a 5-year plan. It's not.
It is a way of life.
Exactly. It's part of life. It shouldn't dominate life,
No.
but it's a part of life. Work is a part of life, and it gives human beings dignity and purpose as well. And there's also the right for the workers to own property. You know, the right to
Exactly.
private property is something which, unknown to most leftists, helps workers. When there were the collective farms, for example, in the Soviet Union and the communist countries,
Who benefited? Who?
it was not something which benefited them,
Of course not.
because they were effectively state-owned.
And this is a very
So the worker would not own
no,
his own work.
And it's very important to keep this in mind because what socialism and communism and of course rampant capitalism as well, because locally now in our time what we see is rampant capitalism, this is what it seeks to do. It seeks to erode, the foundations of the family through exploitative work, which in turns, decreases the morals in society, decreases time where parents have with their children. It's a constant erosion of the nuclear family because everyone knows that, the nuclear family is what keeps society afloat. And it is done with malice and with bad intention and just with, not even with carelessness, I would say, with intention, as I said before, in order to dominate the system.
Yes, in fact, there's also that aspect of Saint Joseph as the family man,
Yes.
which is something that's also important to the idea of the worker as a family man who works for the family, for the good of the family. And that's something which is also different to what we're used to hearing with regards to both capitalistic and socialistic ideologies, where
Rewriting gendered ideologies as well.
the worker is seen as someone who ought to look out for himself
Yes.
and for his material goods, for his material needs. In terms of the socialistic aspect, instead of the capitalistic aspect, it's ideal for the worker not to have a family at all and to
Just a
dedicate
cog
his
in the
life
machine.
to just working for the system itself. But Saint Joseph is the allegory of Saint Joseph as this worker is a person who's dedicated. His work is dedicated to Christ and the Holy Family, so to say, the Sagra Familia. And it's also an example for all Christian families to follow. The idea that work should serve as a means, part of a means at least, to achieve sanctity. The idea that there is a supernatural element involved in work, not just the material aspect. Because the problem is that once you lose the supernatural element in work,
What are you left with?
The transcendent element in work, you end up with work becoming just another material ideology, which basically you can morph it into whatever you want. And as soon as you do that, you also lose the dignity of the worker,
Exactly.
who also has a transcendent purpose in society and in life.
As we were saying, I really see St. Joseph not just as a blueprint, because St. Joseph is the blueprint for fathers, how fathers should be, but he's also the blueprint for workers, whether you're a woman or a man. I think his personhood is something is so monumental to us Catholics and non-Catholics, and we can really draw inspiration from him. Moving a bit now towards local scene, I just wanted to spend a very few brief minutes looking a bit at locally what we have presented to us. So we know that the 1st of May is seldom a celebration for us about the dignity of workers, but instead it's used and exploited for our two political parties to mainly, of course, it's more associated with one naturally.
Labour.
To, of course, to celebrate their own party, their own achievement. Again, it's the I and not the we. And, we know that there's going to be mass meetings being held and an election is impendingly looming on us. I just wanted to see your reaction a bit to how this day can transform, or rather the disappointments and the failures you see about how locally we make use of the day. And before I take your comments, I just wanted to also make it clear that Mass was very much instrumental in the 1st of May, and May Day, becoming locally a public holiday. So as we know, in 1956, Mass has always been there for workers. It's always been very worker-centric, but also family-centric. And it's also been a strong promoter for women, for their rights in the workplace. And we can't forget Mass's importance in the legacy that we have for May Day being a public holiday locally. And now I'll just take your comments.
Yes, both parties will be doing political rallies on the 1st of May. But more often than not, as is the case in Malta,
It's dominated by...
they do it for purely partisan reasons, and also because it seems that an election is looming. So they would want to sort of gear up their own respective support base. I think that with regards to the 1st of May today, in Malta at least, and the way that it's celebrated by both parties, it leaves a lot to be desired, so to say, for a number of reasons. Usually, the 1st of May is used by both parties, especially the one in government, to sort of brag about how much benefits and social benefits and checks they've given out to workers, how much government jobs were given out, in order to essentially, so to say, gain votes and appease and approval, etc. By doing so, they're actually missing the point of the idea of
I think they're actually
workers,
working against, if it was the people protesting 2 centuries ago, to be protesting against these people, because after all, it's an exploitation of the general working population rather than...
Yes, ironically, the Labour Party, it's always been like that, became the part of the established bourgeois class, so to say. It's a business-minded party which uses workers only to win elections.
Mind you, we should say that it's the whole political class currently, so the whole...
Yes.
That has a business oriented, and unfortunately it's been the way for a couple of years.
But I would put the emphasis on the Labour Party because obviously it's supposed to be the party of the working class.
Yes.
Now, the working class in Malta is year by year decreasing because you get a lot of people becoming pensioners. And the new working class is being taken over by the foreign workers, the third country nationals, which are being imported. Now, that system, I tend to call it a sort of a parasitic system, so to say, is detrimental to the Maltese worker,
As well as the foreign worker, because
as well as the foreign worker.
we need to, also be cognizant that they are very much being exploited.
And that's something that none of the two parties are mentioning.
Or addressing,
Or
or willing
addressing.
to address.
Exactly, exactly. I mean, we're going to get a train system apparently in 15 years. I mean,
For us.
I don't know for who, but they made it seem like it's some big news. I mean, who gives a what about?
I'd rather have a
train?
property
I mean,
market that is, dignified to us
I really
workers.
don't. I personally speaking, I really don't care if I have a train or not. I mean, it doesn't make a difference for me, to be honest. And I mean, it just shows the level of politics that's abysmal and just
Fails to miss the mark every
so
time.
the level of politics in Malta is so poor, so abysmal. Sometimes even so stupid. It's not even worth not worth discussing, because you have to discuss it because it affects you.
It's integral to discuss.
But it's so mundane
Childish.
and boring. All the only thing the parties discuss is who. I know our proposal for the train came before yours. No, ours came before yours. Oh no, there's tarmac on the soil. But I mean,
Who
cares
at
about
that
the
point?
tarmac on the soil? Just pick it up and throw it on the street. Who
We
cares
have
about
so
it?
many bigger
Why
problems.
do we need to make debates about tarmac on the soil, for example? I don't know. And anyways, and then you cross over into Europe, and you start seeing the news in Europe on these political parties with regards to workers. You have
Serious
France.
discussions.
You had, for example, the yellow vests protesting. Now you have a crisis in government where
We had the farmers protesting in
you have
Belgium.
the farmers' protests.
Netherlands.
You have in Spain, where the socialist government is not popular. And they're discussing about this legalization of the 500,000 immigrants which are there.
Same with Hungary. I mean, we have
And
the new.
the right-wing parties are opposing it ideologically.
Yes.
And in Italy, it's the same ideological battles. And then Malta, you come.
Trains.
Our train is better than your train. Whatever. Insomma. That's Malta for you, unfortunately. We never learn. But with regards to this, it was a sort of a
Tangent.
a tangent. But anyway, the idea is that in a generation's time, there will no longer be Maltese workers. There will only be foreign workers in Malta who are currently being exploited. And if we're not careful, once they start unionizing, they will effectively
Dominate.
start taking control of the institutions of the country itself and will no longer have a nation.
And it's important to keep in mind, I saw a statistic recently that most foreign workers, after, for example, 1 year to 3 years, they leave. So we're upskilling, a set group of people, but we're not reaping the rewards. And again, it is very unfortunate.
They're not leaving their money here. They're taking it overseas.
Exactly. They always send it back home. And it's very unfortunate to see
So
these
we're-
people exploited.
Exactly.
But you need to keep in mind
Yes.
that their exploitation is not benefiting, the rest of the Maltese. And even
No,
if it
not
did,
at
it's
all.
not correct. But it's only benefiting the people that are lining their
The
pockets.
economy is exploitative. It should not exploit
of the
anyone.
Maltese and the foreigner
It
equally.
should not exploit anyone.
Exactly.
Essentially,
Exactly.
Malta essentially became a transactional island, so to say, where money passes through and just keeps on going.
But nothing is left locally.
No. In fact, something which really is hurting the new generation of workers, the Maltese ones at least, is, for example, the property market, and also what's the term?
First-time buyers.
Not first-time buyers when it comes to new jobs.
First-time workers.
First-time workers, for example, and all that, where
people who are entering
employers
into the
generally
working market.
prefer to hire foreign workers for a lower pay.
Of course.
Because the Maltese workers would prefer the higher pay.
Of course.
So we're keeping wages low. And because of the supply and demand rule of economics for property, prices skyrocket. You have, for example, 10 to 20 people living in one apartment who are foreign because they're used to living like that,
And
but
rent
the Maltese
goes
are
up.
not.
Maltese cannot.
And sort of for them, it's fine to live in a room as this big and they live 10
Yes.
people because Maltese are not used to living like this.
And
for
no
example.
one should have to live
So
like
they're
that.
outsourced in the
Yes.
market.
But what happens then? What happens to the Maltese that don't afford houses and can't find employment? They usually end up, for example, in a cycle of either civil service, we have very good civil service workers in Malta. You can't deny that. But unfortunately, we know that we have a system.
It's being exploited as well
Exactly.
for partisan
And
reasons.
what happens?
As
You get
it's
social,
always been.
you get social
but
housing because you refuse to build workers up. Instead, you're happy leaving them at that situation they are, giving them social houses and social benefits. And you're making use of the foreign workers to exploit, leaving the system as it is, and it just creates a cycle where you're lining your pockets, but the Maltese, as well as the foreigners, are simply in a
Yes.
situation that's
Yes.
very miserable.
Yes. In fact, that's why I think the 1st of May in Malta it's become a meaningless holiday in my opinion, at least from the political perspective, because
Very ironic, I think, holiday rather.
it's I mean, the system around you can see it's exploitative, people drowning in debts, can't afford property, people have to work 2 jobs in order to keep up with life. And
Young families, the mother has to work.
Yes.
We have free childcare, fair enough. But I
and
mean, why
don't-
should a baby have
and
to
some
be
people
there?
would argue, well, the government's offering subsidies and all that, but subsidies, they don't do anything.
And the government can't,
in
give
truth.
you time.
And the subsidies don't work after a year, because after a year, life, not the quality of life,
Cost of living.
cost of living starts going up again, and the subsidies become
And you're stuck in the
meaningless.
same situation.
Exactly. So, in truth, what needs to be done is a total overhaul of the entire system. Now, you would say, well, some businesses would suffer and all that, and sacrifices have to be. But unfortunately, that's the reality that they brought us into it. So they wanted a short-term economy where people gain a lot of money in a short amount of time.
But not feasible long term.
But they did not consider the social aspects that would
Yes.
be detrimental to our society with regards to demographics, to wages, etc. So I think unless anyone attempts to address this economy, by grabbing the bull's horns, the bull by the horns, and trying to change it, say even
stuck. We're
75% of it at least needs to change.
Yes.
I mean, they can brag about subsidies and checks and all that all they want, but the
But we're
problems
stuck in the
are
same
remaining.
place.
They
Yes,
will
yes,
remain,
yes.
and they will get worse,
Yes.
unfortunately. Now, and just to conclude with this, we mentioned PN, PL, Workers' Day. There's also another element which I think should be more vocal on this day,
The
and that's the
church.
church.
Yes.
In the 1960s, in the 1970s, the 1st of May used to be a very big day for the church, because there used to be mass rallies on the granaries
Fossos,
in Floriana, sometimes addressed by the Archbishop himself.
We have, in fact, a newspaper cutting that references to thousands turning up on the granaries.
Yes, yes. Most of these would be mass, at the time, anti-socialist protests,
Pro-worker,
pro-worker
pro-dignity,
protests, but
pro-church.
from the point of view of Catholic social teaching,
Exactly.
and the way that the church sees the worker as dignified, but as also as
Someone carrying responsibility.
elevated, not only materially but also morally and culturally.
Yes.
And the cultural battle lost in the 1960s, unfortunately, has led to the degradation of the worker to the state in which he is today.
Finds himself now.
Exactly. And I think that on the 1st of May, the church should attempt to be at least more vocal on its position on workers' rights, workers' duties, and also offer its own vision to society, which it has. The church has such a rich teaching
From which it can,
from which it
just
can
develop.
can develop. I mean, both parties developed out of Catholic social teaching, after all.
Exactly, it's energetic.
So it's not something which the church is, you're jumping on the bandwagon of both parties. As a matter of fact, the parties jumped on the bandwagon
The
of
church has been the leader, at least in the European context, for these type of rights. Ad nauseum, ad eternum. It's
Exactly.
just been the case, it's a
It's been
historical
defending
reality.
workers since before political parties developed.
Exactly,
So
exactly.
I think it has every right.
A rich history.
It has every right to speak out on
Yes.
this issue.
Yes. Well, thank you so much. I think it's been a very interesting discussion, even though we maybe ended on a bit of a somber note about our local situation. I really hope that, whether the church or other entities are, looking towards May Day as a day where we can really focus on what needs to be, developed locally. And thank you so much, and thank you to the audience for joining us today. We hope that your May Day was a good one, and we look forward to having you with us for our next podcast. Thank you.